Yellowstone just handed anglers back most of its rivers and streams. As of August 12th, the restrictions that shut down afternoon and evening fishing across most of the park, restrictions that had been in place since late July, have been lifted. Cooler weather did what it always does out there. It saved the fish. Now, if you weren't following this story as it unfolded, let me walk you through the whole thing, because the history of it tells you everything about how this park thinks, and it'll change how you fish it. This didn't start on July 29th. It started weeks earlier, in early July, when water temperatures in select rivers and streams pushed past 68 degrees Fahrenheit and stayed there, with air temperatures forecast to hit around 90. That's the trigger point. On July 9th, the park put its first restriction in place: afternoon closures on select waters. Then, on July 15th, 3 specific rivers got hit harder: the Madison, the Firehole, and the Gibbon, downstream of Norris Campground, went to a full closure. No fishing at all, any hour. And then, as the heat held through the back half of July, the park expanded that restriction park-wide. Starting July 29th, every river and stream in Yellowstone went under what's called a Hoot owl closure. Fishing allowed from sunrise until 2 in the afternoon, and shut down completely from 2 o'clock until the next sunrise. That term, hoot owl, comes from old logging camps out west. Loggers used to start work at first light and knock off by early afternoon during fire season, working only in the cool hours when the owls were still out, so a spark off a saw blade wouldn't catch dry brush in the heat of the day. Fish and wildlife agencies borrowed the same idea and the same name. Fish in the cool hours stop before the heat peaks. It's not a new idea. It's just old wisdom about working with the day instead of against it, applied to a trout stream instead of a timber crew. Here's the actual biology behind why 2 in the afternoon is the line they draw. Trout are cold water fish, which means their body temperature moves with the water around them. They can't regulate it the way we can. When that water climbs past the high 60s and stays there, 2 things go wrong for the fish at the same time. First, warm water simply holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water, so the fish is trying to breathe through a resource that's already running short. Second, heat speeds up a trout's metabolism, which means it needs more oxygen right when there's less of it available. Add a fight on the end of a hook to that equation, even a short one, and you're pushing a fish that's already gasping into full exertion. Wildlife agencies use 73 degrees, held for 3 straight days, as their rule of thumb trigger for closing a river outright, and some species get an even lower threshold because they're more heat-sensitive than others. Cutthroat trout and bull trout are 2 of the most sensitive fish in this whole ecosystem, which is exactly why Yellowstone protects its native cutthroat as hard as it does. This wasn't a one-summer fluke either, and I think that's worth knowing before you plan a trip. Yellowstone and the surrounding rivers in Montana have gone through this same pattern in recent years, running back to 2024, when the Madison, Firehole, and Gibbon all got shut down completely by mid-July, and a long list of other waters across the region went under hoot owl restrictions right alongside them, some of which stayed in place most of the summer. It's become something close to an annual event out there: low snowpack, low stream flow, hot summers pushing water temperatures into the danger zone earlier and holding them there longer. Doesn't mean every summer plays out exactly the same. It means if you're planning a Yellowstone trip in July or August, you should go in expecting the possibility of restrictions, not surprised by them. So here's where things stand right now, and what it means for you. Most of the park's rivers, streams, and lakes are open daily, sunrise to sunset. No hoot owl restriction currently attached, straight out of the 2026 Fishing Regulations booklet. The exception is still the Madison, the Firehole, and the Gibbon below Norris. Those 3 have been under a full closure since July 15th, and they're staying that way, because they run through geothermal country. The Firehole flows past hot springs and geyser basins for a good stretch of its length, and that geothermal influence keeps the water warmer than the surrounding rivers even once the weather itself cools off. Staff are watching the temperature on those three day by day. That closure could lift soon, or it could tighten right back up if conditions swing the wrong way. Before you build a trip around any of those three rivers specifically, check the park's current fishing page. Now let's get into what you're actually going to catch out there, because Yellowstone runs one of the most carefully managed fisheries in the country, and every rule attached to it exists for a reason. 7 species, split into 2 categories that get treated completely differently. On the native side, Yellowstone cutthroat trout, West Slope cutthroat trout, mountain whitefish, and Arctic grayling. Every one of those goes back in the water the moment you unhook it. No keeping one, no exceptions. That's the law inside the park. On the non-native side, rainbow trout, brown trout, brook trout, and lake trout. Those carry actual bag limits, and the limits shift depending on exactly which water you're fishing. Some rivers let you keep a couple, some stay catch and release even on the non-natives. Don't guess on this one. Pull the regulations booklet for the specific water before you go. Now here's the part of this story I think matters most, and it's the reason I wanted to make this video instead of just reading you a status update. There's a predator working against the native cutthroat trout in Yellowstone Lake, and it isn't a bear, an osprey, or anything you'd expect. It's another kind of trout. Lake trout got into Yellowstone Lake decades back, most likely through an illegal introduction, and they're ambush predators. They live deep, they grow big, and they eat young cutthroat by the thousands over a lifetime. Once lake trout got established in that lake, the native cutthroat population that half the food web up there depends on started dropping hard. Grizzlies that used to fatten up on spawning cutthroat in the tributary creeks lost a food source almost overnight in ecological terms. Ospreys, eagles, otters, the whole chain took a hit because one predator got somewhere it never belonged. So here's the rule, and it tells you everything about how seriously this park takes the problem. Catch a lake trout in Yellowstone Lake or its rivers, and you don't put it back. You're required to kill it. That's not cruelty. That's conservation. Plain and simple. Every lake trout pulled out is one less predator working against a native fish that's already fighting an uphill battle to hold its numbers. I've talked to guides up there who'll tell you straight, if you want to feel like your day on that lake actually did something for the ecosystem, go after lake trout on purpose. You're not just landing a fish, you're doing that lake a genuine favor. That philosophy runs through every rule in this park if you step back and look at the whole picture. Barbless hooks required almost everywhere, so a released fish doesn't come apart getting the hook out. Artificial lures and flies only across nearly the entire park. No live bait, because bait fishing usually means a fish swallows the hook deep, and that fish isn't surviving a release no matter how careful you are. Fly fishing only on the Madison, the Firehole, and part of the Gibbon, the same 3 rivers we've been talking about all through this story. None of these rules exist to make your trip harder. They exist because this park isn't managing a fishery for one good season. It's managing one for the next 100 years, the same way it's been managed since they stopped stocking these waters back in 1955 and let the native fish start rebuilding on their own terms. Let me tell you why this sticks with me even outside of Yellowstone. I was fishing a warm water lake down in Missouri a few summers back, middle of a heat wave, water low, and I watched a father let his kid fight a bass for a good 10 minutes in 85-degree water just so the boy could feel like he'd really earned the catch. That fish went belly up 10 seconds after it hit the water on release. Nobody meant a bit of harm. Nobody in that boat knew any better. That's the exact lesson Yellowstone's teaching every angler who walks through those gates in July. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a fish is get it in fast, get it out fast, and let the water temperature decide how hard you play it, not your pride. If you're planning a Yellowstone trip this season, here's how I'd build it. Check the current status on the Madison, Firehole, and Gibbon before you plan a trip specifically around them, since that closure is still live as of this video. Pack barbless hooks or pinch your barbs down before you get there, because rangers do check. Bring your flies and your artificial lures, and leave the bait bucket at home entirely. It's off limits almost everywhere inside the park. And if lake trout are anywhere on your radar out on Yellowstone Lake, go in already knowing you're keeping what you catch, because that's the deal up there, and honestly, it's a good one. I want to hear from you on this. Have you ever fished Yellowstone, or is it still sitting on your list? If you've been up there, tell me what you caught and which water you were on. I want to know if you tangled with a cutthroat in one of the backcountry streams, pulled a big brown out of the Yellowstone River itself, or went hunting lake trout out on the lake on purpose. Drop it in the comments. I read every one of them. Here's the thing about a park like Yellowstone. It's not just water with fish swimming in it. It's one of the last places in this country where you can still catch a trout that's genetically almost identical to the ones swimming there 150 years ago, in a system that's still, mostly, running the way nature built it to run. That's rare. That's worth protecting, hoot owl restrictions and all. Every angler who follows these rules, who plays a fish fast in warm water instead of dragging out the fight, who kills a lake trout instead of turning it back loose, who checks the current regulations instead of guessing, that angler is part of the reason this place is still wild enough to matter. Get out there when the water's right, treat it with the respect it's earned, and you'll understand real quick why so many of us keep coming back to that park, year after year, for as long as we're able to wade a river.